How many times have you heard the phrase, just say no to your PDA kid? Or it might be something like, just set a boundary, just take away the iPad, just make them eat, just turn off the TV, right? Many of us have heard those phrases and felt very triggered by them and not understood exactly how to respond or how to articulate what the truth of our situation was as a parent of a PDA child or teen. So this was certainly me 5, 6, even 4 years ago, where I felt like I understood intuitively that boundaries and limits and saying no to my child were often not worth the cost to what would happen in response, what would happen to his basic needs. But I didn't have the language, the logic, the causality, or the ability to articulate it, right? I just knew that when I was trying to support him to pick up the toys, in our house, our rule is that if we make a mess with the toys, we clean it up and or clean it up together, like sharing the demand. At the time, I didn't have that terminology. But what would happen? I would encourage him to clean up the toys. I would scaffold him to clean up the toys. I would get frustrated that he wasn't cleaning up the toys. And then I would pressure him to clean up the toys. And then I would, threaten like taking things away. I would make him sit there. I would do all the things that I was told to do, right? And what would happen? He would go into not just resistance, defiance, meltdown. He would go into a full-blown panic attack. He would turn into like a feral animal in the sense that he was in his animal brain, his survival brain, and he was unable to think rationally. He was in his survival brain because I was pressuring him, right? And so as a result of trying to be consistent with picking up a few toys, it was resulting in 1 hour of him screaming and thrashing and being scared of me. Like I would try and soothe him and he wouldn't be able to be soothed and he would lash out just like a scared animal would. At the time, I did not understand why. It would also, I would observe, okay, I'm trying to make him pick up the toys. The toys don't get picked up, right? The problem doesn't get solved. We both feel terrible. And that night his eating would decrease and his sleeping, right? So as a mom, I intuited that, and I think many of you that are listening here have felt this, that your will or your consistency or you're trying to implement rules in the household could never outpower or outlast or out consistency your PDA child or teen. Why? Because your willpower can never overpower another human's survival instinct. The survival instinct will always win because we are designed in an evolutionary way to have our nervous systems and our subconscious mind respond in ways that will keep us alive, right? And that's just going to keep happening if we're perceiving that we're in danger or we're in life threat. So I experienced this as a mom, but for years I could not explain it because it didn't make sense to me. I knew that it happened. I knew that there was a link, but it was only when I came across PDA and the logic of the PDA brain and nervous system that I started to be able to give language to what was happening, right? And for myself, put some structure around it. So I started to understand two things as really important to understanding why this was the case. First, as we've talked about before, the neuroception or the subconscious perception before the frontal lobe and the conscious brain comes online, the neuroception around safety, danger, life threat. And for the PDAer, on a subconscious level, before the rational brain kicks on, there's the perception of threat anytime there's a loss of autonomy, freedom, and choice, and or the sensation that someone or something is putting themselves above the PDAer. So what's happening when I'm trying to make my son clean up toys without this knowledge? I am initially signaling to him by being above him, telling him what to do, and removing his autonomy or choice around picking up the toys. I'm signaling to his survival brain, hey, danger, danger, right? And that's subconscious. He's not aware of it. And it's happening before the rational thought kicks in, especially for a young child. And so it's telling his nervous system, hey, respond in a way that will keep you alive, okay? You have the mobilization, fight, flight, or what looks like defiance. Then, what does the parent like me do who tries to follow the rules and tries to do everything right? I double down. Nope, you have to clean up the toys with me. I'm gonna help you, but we're gonna do it together. And I dig in my heels. All of a sudden, the neuroception is not just danger. We're moving into life threat because the root cause of what's telling the nervous system, hey, go into fight or flight, I'm increasing it with my boundary and my rule, right? And then the second logic, which is so important for parents to understand, is the cumulative or fluctuating nature of this. So every time that neuroception is perceiving threat or life threat, it's sending the nervous system in the body into that panic state. And sometimes it's internalized. We don't see it. Sometimes it's like a whoop, and then it goes down. But it builds over time, and we don't always see how much has built up in the system and how close they are to their threshold of what they can tolerate for how much their nervous system activates before they tip into full-blown panic and, or if that happens consistently, burnout. Okay? So this is something I did not understand, right? And I couldn't articulate to people, like, I can't just say no. Right? Feel free to drop an emoji, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, or raise your hand in the car as you're driving to get groceries. Like, yep, I've had that same feeling of like, I can't just say no, but you don't know how to explain it to people, right? So before I understood this logic, I was doing things that weren't necessarily worth the cost of what was happening inside of him. Like, I had a rule around, like, I need to be consistent in making him put on his shoes and socks or else he'll never learn, right? So I'm doubling down on like, nope, you need to be independent. You need to put your shoes on. You need to put your socks on. You're old enough. You need to learn that skill, because that's what I was told to do as a parent. You need to eat what's on your plate. You don't get to eat dessert if you don't eat what's on your plate. You don't get to eat anything else if it's not what's on your plate. You have to come grocery shopping with me because my husband's not there and we need food. You need to put on your seatbelt, right? These are all normal, quote, normal parent things where it should just be, just do it, right? But for us as parents of PDA children and teens, we have experienced the cost of setting off our child's nervous system to a degree that it has put them into burnout and disabled them from accessing basic needs. And so it isn't just a question of just say no for us, right? So how do we deal with this? Well, what do we do, right? How do we stay sane? How do we structure our thinking? How do we even begin to wrap our minds around having a family that's functioning and safe for everyone involved? I think this is the key question for parents who are raising a pathologically demand avoidant child or teen, especially those of us who have children who externalize and who go more into that fight flight rather than freeze, shut down, or fawn. That being said, the logic of what's going on in the nervous system is the same regardless of expression. And so it might feel less intense in some moments, but the implications for the child are still the same, right? So the key constraint that I believe everyone on this call who believes their child is PDA or, is looking through that lens of a survival drive for autonomy, all of us, myself included, I experienced it this morning trying to get the kids to camp. We are always activating or accommodating our child or teen. There is no gray space. There is no in between. There is no yellow zone. Okay? This is specific to PDA children and teens from my perspective. And this is what makes it unique from a child, parenting a child who is ADHD or autistic or some other neurotype that doesn't have this specific constraint. Okay? So if we're always activating or accommodating them, if no matter what we do, we're always facing this constraint, how do we make sense of our lives, right? So I want to talk about 4 ways of thinking about and understanding boundaries, the 4 misconceptions that I had when I first started this journey, and how you might start using this lens and way of thinking to answer your own questions about what I call the 3 S's. Screens, siblings, school, and then, violence or setting boundaries around aggression and equalizing behavior. Equalizing behavior meaning the behavioral expression of the disability when the child or teen perceives threat and they are behaving in a way that's controlling, manipulative, critical, destructive to another safe nervous system or towards themselves. So for an internalized PDA, this might look like self-harm, self-loathing, breaking one's own things. Okay, so here are the 4 misconceptions and how we can start to think about them a little bit differently. Okay, so, and again, this is when I started this journey, I did not understand the nuance around boundaries, and it felt very easy to drop into the oh my God, this is anarchy, this is chaos, I can never set a boundary, I can never do anything to stop my child's behavior, etc. Okay, so the 4 misconceptions are: first, boundaries are the same exact thing as rules. Second, you can never set boundaries with a PDA child or teen. 3, boundaries are static and must not change over time or in the moment. And 4, there is a boundary strategy that someone on this earth has. Maybe it's me. I'm going to tell you it's not me because I don't have it. There is a boundary strategy that will get rid of or fix or solve the activation, the equalizing, and the neuroception of the PDA around the boundary. What do I mean by that? This is the main place parents get stuck, so I'm going to talk about this last, but it's the idea that there is a fix or a solution out there from an expert that if you apply this script, if you apply this way of doing things, if you do this accommodation this way, then you can set a boundary without activating the nervous system of the PDA. I do not believe that exists, and this is part of radical acceptance. That doesn't mean we can't work towards solutions and creating a window and ways of doing things. It just means we have to radically accept at the foundation that the root cause of what sets off the nervous system is the neuroception around lack of freedom and choice and autonomy, which is often what a boundary does. It prevents someone from having autonomy and or putting oneself above another person, which when one decides to set a boundary, it's going to be perceived by the PDA brain as threatening because it is you deciding and not them. Okay? So let's talk about the first one. Boundaries are the same as rules. So I've done an entire podcast on this one, so I'm not going to go as in depth, but I want to give you guys some examples to illustrate how to think about this. Okay? So rules are often, the way I think about rules, and feel free to disagree, but I'm trying to give you guys clarity in your thinking and structure around it, and this is what's worked for me to make sense of the chaos. Rules are a set of laws or norms or things that are expected of other people. Okay, so they're set we pick up toys in our house, we tie our own shoes, we don't swear at our brother, right? And those rules are focused on what the other does, right? So the PDA child or teen, right? Versus a boundary, which is at its core what you do in response to a situation. It has much less to do with trying to control others, which I've learned through this journey with my PDA son and have become deeply spiritual about this aspect of like, you can never control another human. It's not your task, right? And this has rippled out into many areas of my life of like, I am not going to focus on trying to control other people. I'm going to focus around what I can do. Okay, so what does this mean in real life, right? I'm going to give you a simple example just to illustrate it. A child is pulling the leaves off your favorite plant, or they're destroying like your tomato plant, or they're, even if it's not intentional and equalizing, they're just sensory seeking and like dismantling something that you're doing, right? And the rule would be like, we don't break other people's things, right? And so in that situation, the response to the rule would be like, hey, stop doing that. Hey, stop breaking my plant. Stop pulling the leaves off the plant. Okay, but what is that doing? It's asking them to change their behavior, right? And what do we know sets off the nervous system of the PDA is when we are above them, telling them to do something, and they don't have freedom and choice, okay? Which is excruciatingly hard as a parent, okay? How do we parent without being able to stop things that are destructive, or to put them in their seatbelt, or to prevent them from harming other people? This is the question, right? So we start to switch into the logic of the boundary, which is, okay, I'm going to refrain from saying stop doing that, and trying and getting angry that they're not changing their behavior because they're getting activated and they're probably doubling down on pulling off those leaves of the plant, and you're watching it and getting mad. Okay, so what you can do is what's under your control, which is you pick up the plant and you move it. And maybe you have to keep it out of, you have to like get rid of the plant. And that's a cost. That's a trade-off, right? This is a simple, low stakes example. I know that you guys have much bigger fish to fry than plants, but I am illustrating this logic for you. Okay, so let me give you another example of how these are different. In our home, we have the boundary or the value of you can't hurt other people emotionally, physically, logically, or psychologically, spiritually. Versus a rules, which would be you can't hit people, you can't call people stupid, you can't swear at people, you can't destroy their things, etc. Okay? This is where the nuance comes in, right? My son, especially when he was in burnout and more activated, and even on some days when he has big cumulative nervous system activation, he did call me stupid, okay? My value is you can't hurt someone else. It doesn't hurt me that he's calling me stupid because I understand the logic of his nervous system. I believe with every cell in my being, it is not under his conscious control. It is an expression of his disability. And so for me, it's not harm. And so I don't necessarily set a boundary because I cognitively know that this is data, this is his nervous system, he has a nervous system disability. I let it go, right? He's not in his thinking brain, so I'm not worried about like him learning to do this is appropriate. And then the same action, calling his brother stupid, may require a boundary. Why? Because my 5-year-old doesn't have to accommodate him. It's not his responsibility. He doesn't have the cognition to understand the nervous system disability. And therefore, I may do something different. I may remove the non-PDA and talk to him about it. I may even signal saying we don't use the word stupid, knowing that it's going to activate the PDA and maybe make him say it more because I have chosen to signal safety and values to my younger son. Okay, these are choices about what I can do in response. Okay, so for example, with a teenager, and I've coached families on this, right? We focus so much on like, it's time for you to get off the iPad. You need to get off the iPad. You've had too much iPad. I don't want you watching these shows or, this violent content or like, they're showing addictive behaviors, right? And so we're faced with this activating or accommodating choice. It is a constraint that we face as parents. There isn't an in-between, right? If we set a boundary, it will activate the nervous system. And if we accommodate, it still might activate the nervous system because they're engaging in inappropriate content that is setting off their sensory system and their emotional regulation. So instead of the rule of you have to get off the iPad when I say, or 7 o'clock is when we turn off the iPad. And if this is working for you, keep doing it. Just ignore me. But sometimes we have to get in the mindset of everything I say and try and control of their behavior is actually making it worse. So I need to focus on my boundary, which means what I can control, right? So instead of focusing on you need to do this, controlling others, I might turn off the internet or set filters on, right? And here's the kicker, and I'm going to talk about this in number 4. This strategy is not going to negate the activation of their nervous system, because no strategies that any of us have make PDA go away, okay? And I just want to be really honest about that, because I feel especially with our program coming up, it's oh, Casey's going to give some secret sauce or some magic bullet that she doesn't share on Instagram to solve this problem. But I don't have a magic bullet, right? It's a way of being with your child, and it's a way of lowering their overall nervous system that supports transformation. But in the moment, I don't have a boundary script that's if you say this, they're not going to activate, because if they didn't, they probably wouldn't be PDA. I'm just being honest. Okay, number 2, you can never set boundaries with a PDA child. It can feel like this, right? And I certainly felt like this many times and still sometimes do. But sometimes we have to set boundaries. What does that mean though? We are going to experience their big nervous system activation, and there will be a cost. There will be a nervous system cost. So for example, I'm just going to give you more extreme examples so that you can see that I face these things too, and I have confetti coming down. There were times when for 3 years we had to separate our kids entirely, okay? I'm not advocating for you to do that. I'm just telling you the truth of my story. It was not safe, the degree of equalizing and targeting against my younger son. So even holidays, including Christmas, we would take separate trips. We would always have a parent on one kid. And we have had au pairs and other adult support in order to facilitate this, okay? But sometimes, Cooper would jump out of the car and run into the home and try and target his 3-year-old brother, and we would have to intercept him and remove him, right? Because it was risk mitigation for actual physical harm, right? That's a boundary, what we do in response. And this did not solve the meltdown. There was a meltdown afterwards, and we had to use our accommodation strategies to de-escalate it. But in scenarios where it's going against the values of your family or the sustainability of your family, if your mental health is so affected by your child being up all night, then we need to explore what boundaries might look like. And in burnout, it might not be possible. I'm just being honest. Okay. The third misconception is that boundaries must be static and can never change over time or in the moment. Okay. And where does this misconception come from? It comes from all parenting advice. And except for the PDA space, I'm not really sure where there's not this logic where if you set a boundary or have a rule, you have to keep it. You have to keep it consistent, and you have to keep it in the moment, because if you don't, you're not going to signal to your child that they're safe. You're not going to be in control, and they're actually going to feel less safe and misbehave more. That's the conventional wisdom. It is present in the neurodiversity space, it's present in the gentle parenting space, it's present everywhere, and that's fine. It's the right logic for a lot of kids. In fact, I would say the majority of kids. But we're not talking about the majority of kids, we're talking about our kids, and our kids are unique, okay? So we have to confront this implicit bias towards this idea of like, if you're not consistent and you don't double down, and if you in the moment are like, okay, fine, like I'm not going to hold this boundary, then you are not going to be creating a situation of growth, learning, safety, etc. for your child. Okay, so this is a hard one. So just think about all the logic in education, in therapy, in parenting that is going to back this up, this conventional wisdom. And I'm going to talk about a different logic, and it's going to go against it. And you're going to be like, okay, I kind of get that, but like, I don't know if I can do it. And it's normal. Like, I felt the same way. But here's the logic of why it's okay to have movable boundaries and boundaries that change. There's two ways to think about it. One, think about it as over time, boundaries will change as your child or teen comes out of burnout and develops more of a window of tolerance, has created some new neural pathways back to the thinking brain with your help, and you have a different relationship that's not based on compliance and authority. Okay, so the types of boundaries that you're holding in burnout, when you are just starting this journey, when you're relearning how to be with your child, and you haven't yet created that felt safety in the home, those are going to look really different than 3 years out, than 1 year out, than 3 years out, than 5 years out, okay? So a term I like to draw on or borrow from the literature on trauma and from Dr. Bruce Perry is the term neurosequential. So what a brain can do depending on what part of the brain it is, okay? So there's a lot of similarities to the trauma-informed work with understanding like what our brain can do at different points, okay? So if your child is hanging out here in that red part of the brain, the survival brain, they're not understanding cause and effect. They can't access empathy. They can't learn, okay? They're in survival. So there were things, for example, when my son was in burnout that I allowed, that I didn't set boundaries on, that over time, as he developed a window and our relationship changed, I changed those boundaries, okay? So for example, he used to run through the kitchen and slap me and slap the what's it called? The trash can, and like, he still does this, but without slapping me on the behind. But I wouldn't say anything in the moment because saying something activated him so much. He would growl, he would hiss, he would say, stop talking. And the cost of doing that was so high that it wasn't worth the boundary, okay? Because we were reestablishing our household. Additionally, like, he needed so much undivided attention and constant signals of nervous system safety that, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, like, I didn't have time to eat because I would start eating and he would start escalating because he didn't have my undivided attention. And so I would eat standing up, and I had a really a bad practice of like only eating frozen foods and like not getting all my meals in because I was so focused on this cost benefit of like, if I take 5 minutes to eat, he's going to destroy things and attack his brother. And it's not worth that cost to me because I didn't have other caregiving support the first year and a half. Okay. And my husband was working. So what does this look like now? Much different, right? I will say something if he does that. And if he asks me to play with him in the moment, like, let's go in the basement and like throw the football, my boundary is, I'm happy to do that, bud, but I'm going to take 10 minutes to eat my dinner. I would not have been able to do that 5 years ago. Okay. So this is what I mean by over time and neurosequential, of understanding three things. Is your child in burnout? Are you brand new to PDA? Do they have a window of tolerance, right? If your child's in burnout, you're brand new to PDA, or I would say honestly within the first 3 to 6 months of shifting your paradigm, or, sorry, I forgot what the third was, but you can listen to it. Those things are going to make the cost of those boundaries higher than they will be when they have a window of tolerance, where they'll still activate with a limit, but it won't necessarily tip them over into that full-on fight, flight, freeze, collapse. Okay? Boundaries can change in the course of a day. Why is this important? Because what happens in a day, whether or not you're there, will determine how close they are to their threshold of tolerance. So if my son, most of the days he goes to camp, he's accommodated, he knows the teacher, he knows the kids, he has a service dog, he's doing special interests and sensory intense things, he has a good day, I expect him to brush his teeth at night, right? I ask him potentially to hang up a towel after his bath where he throws it on the ground. If he comes in and drops Twix wrappers, I'm going to be like, can you please pick up the Twix wrapper? However, I might not realize what happened at school that day or at camp that day. Maybe he had a situation out on the playground where, he saw a kid cheating, he told them, they refused to change their behavior, normal kid stuff, but it's going to be perceived as threatening, so it's going to build up in his system, right? Maybe he didn't get to go first in line. Maybe he was told to do something that he didn't want to do. Normal stuff, right? But it's going to accumulate in his system. So when he gets home, I might not be aware. I often am, because I can tell by his body movements being more jerky. I can tell by his tone, his facial expression, how much he's talking, the indicators. But sometimes I don't know, right? And I might say to him, hey, bud, can you pick up your Twix wrapper? And, he might be like, stop talking. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, that's data. He's near his threshold. Something must have happened today. And so I take away the boundary. I'm just like, don't worry about it. I got it. And then I inquire later when he's calmed down, like, hey, did something happen at school? It seems like your body's having a hard time, right? And then we can connect on it rather than me doubling down on if I say you have to pick something up, you gotta do it, right? Because sometimes we don't know how much cumulative nervous system activation our children have, and it's a fluctuating disability. Okay? So the fourth misconception, and this is, I think, one of the primary places that parents get stuck, myself included, and where we start to get into the topic of radical acceptance, is the idea, and I mentioned this already, the idea that there is a boundary strategy, a script, a technique, a tactic that you can employ to make your child not have activation around that limit, that boundary. Okay? This is the seeking that we all do. The seeking of, is there a way to make my child not PDA? And even if we're not consciously aware of this or would never say that out loud, most of us are doing that. Not because we don't love our children or on the surface accept that they're PDA or neurodivergent. It's that we don't want to accept the trade-offs, which are harrowing trade-offs of if I set a boundary with my child, they're going to start throwing things and chasing me into a closet where I have to hide because they're so activated. And I know not all of you are at that level, but I've worked with families where they are at that level, right? And so there is no strategy. There is no here's a script for boundaries. And if you do it, it's going to make this easy. It's not going to be easy. That doesn't mean we can't set the boundaries. What we have to do is we have to start thinking about that constraint that we all share, the activating or accommodating, and accept it, right? If I set the boundary, if I say no, there will be activation. Is the cost worth it? And often when we start to do this, we realize we have two really shitty options. Neither of them are good. Not setting a boundary means our younger child is basically getting abused, and setting a boundary means that the child, has an impact on basic needs. Maybe they're up all night. Maybe they react in a big meltdown. Maybe they engage in self-harm, right? And so it's this impossible situation where we're like, what am I supposed to do, right? This is like a rock in a hard place to the nth degree, right? So it's very hard for other people to understand this truth that all of us live with day to day to keep our families safe and well. So how can we make sense of this? How can we move forward? How can we get unstuck? I'm going to introduce but not teach you entirely a tool which is called cost-benefit decision making. Okay? So again, when you're searching for solutions and maybe I should read this book, maybe I should follow this creator, maybe I should go to this workshop, and please do if it's helpful. But if you find yourself in that seeking, the frustrating process of I'm looking for the answer, I'm looking for the solution, the first mindset shift of okay, if this is screens, siblings, school, violence, self-harm, all these things, I might need to take a step back, and instead of focusing on solutions, I might need to get back into decisions, right? Because that's what's actually happening of there might not be a solution, but we can make decisions. And so with cost-benefit decision-making, there's really 3 steps that I teach parents to outline. And I'll continue to teach on this, but if you guys want to practice this and apply it to your home, we do that throughout the Paradigm Shift program, which is enrolling on Monday for the wait list only. But what this cost-benefit decision-making does, the first thing you do is you accept your constraints, okay? So feel free to do this if you're listening on the podcast, if you're not driving, if you're here with me now, take out a piece of paper and at the top, write down the constraint that we share. I'm activating or accommodating my child. This is what makes my parenting unique. This is what makes it different than other parents with neurotypical kids. It's different than a parent with an ADHD kid. It's different from a parent with an autistic child. Doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just a unique constraint to us. Okay, that constraint we all share. Then we have constraints that are unique, right? You might be a single parent. You might be in a geographic area that doesn't have a lot of support. You might live in a foreign country where you're not allowed to unschool, like Germany. You might have a partner who is not supportive. Your finances might not be ample. You might not have family around. You might have a child from a marginalized identity. Maybe they're a Black child, and non-compliance in public has a higher cost than if you have a white child. These are just constraints that we accept, right? These are just truths. And we're not going to judge them. We're just going to make them clear. And your constraints will be absolutely unique to you. Maybe you have childhood trauma, maybe your PDA, maybe your ADHD, maybe, whatever your constraint is, you're going through a divorce. All these things, we write them down of just here are my constraints. I cannot change any of these in the moment and perhaps never. Some of them we can readdress. Some of them will just always be how they are. Okay? Those are our unique constraints. Then we take a specific question of what should I do when my child is stealing the toys from my younger sibling? Or what should I do if my teen is engaging in pornography and won't stop looking up these more and more distressing content on their phone? We take that question. We have our constraints. Then we do a cost benefit with scenario 1, setting a boundary. What are the costs to the PDA's nervous system? What are the benefits of setting a boundary? It can be both, right? For the example with the teen, the cost of setting the boundary will activate the nervous system in the moment because you're removing autonomy and putting yourself above them as the decider. However, the benefit might be that they're not emotionally distressed and copying what's in the content, and so actually there's also a benefit to the nervous system. And then we want to look at the net. Then we put it within the cost benefit of the family. We talk about the cost benefit to the mom or the dad, the lead parent, cost benefit to siblings, and we outline it all. Then we do the same thing for not setting a boundary. And then often what you're going to see is 2 shitty options. In both scenarios, we're facing that constraint of like activating or accommodating. And then this is where movement happens for parents, and this is the core of the paradigm shift program. We start to radically accept, I have these 2 choices, neither one is great, I'm going to move forward with one. And I'm going to accept that there isn't a third option. And when we do that, the energy starts to shift. We start to allocate our energy and focus away from seeking solutions that don't exist towards ourselves again, so that we can access our agency and our resourcefulness within the constraints that we face. Because we're raising children with a nervous system disability, and so we will have trade-offs that other families don't. Okay? So this is the way I conceptualize boundaries in order to make sense of what feels like chaos for many of us parents of PDAers. So if you are someone who would like to join a live program to practice all of this stuff with your situation and real people helping you, me included, I want to invite you to think about joining the Paradigm Shift program. We run it 3 times a year. The next enrollment is on Monday. So if you're interested, I'm going to post this and you can comment for the link to the wait list. It will be open to the wait list for 48 hours. And if there are spots left, we will open it to the public until August 9th or until spots full. So it's a large group program, but it's a live program. And it's awesome and all comprehensive and wonderful. And if you want the details, we will send them to you. All right. Okay, so if you comment waitlist now, it will disappear because I can't see the chat transcript. So once I upload it, if you want to comment, I will give you the deets. Yeah. So is it okay for experts to join? So this program is only for parents. You have to be a parent of a PDA child or teen. And the reason for that is it's because like there's a lot of trauma healing, there's a lot of vulnerability, there's a lot of grief that we're moving through. And it's exquisitely intimate and vulnerable for parents always with PDA children, but within the program, it's only other parents who are going through that. So I apologize, but we don't let like therapists and teachers and other professionals join this particular program. But great question. This is exactly what happened to me, and I'm quite proud of myself for my ability to change, adapt, and live in more peace. Yeah, awesome. Good work. Yeah, it's only hard when time and time again relatives question all this. Yeah, so we have a whole module on that. So module 5 is like advocacy and creating safety outside of the home. You're so welcome. All right, I hope this is helpful. Yeah. Okay, my friends, have a wonderful Thursday, and we will see each other soon. Do you think you might ever do a program for spouses of PDAers? I don't believe that I'm not married to a PDAer. I've worked with a lot of parents who are married to PDAers, but a lot of them are in the program. I don't foresee doing like super specific stuff like that, but there are circles within the moderated community that are more like affinity groups, like parents of adopted children, parents of trans children, right? But those come out organically as each cohort comes through. Okay, I hope that's helpful. See you guys soon. Bye.